let's turn our attention from the modern, unexplained lights that have caused a flood of controversy to the ancient flood that may at last have found an explanation. What you're about to see is highly controversial. The concept of a worldwide flood destroying presumably all human and animal life on the planet, except for those taken aboard Noah's Ark, has generated disagreement and debate for thousands of years. But there have been new findings the modern investigator cannot ignore. Could it be that after thousands of years the biblical story of the Great Deluge is about to be confirmed?
Most efforts to understand the flood are flawed because investigators choose to accept some parts of the biblical account but ignore others, and because only some scientific evidence is considered. Meteorites are now being analyzed that suggest they did not originate in the void of outer space, but actually here on Earth, launched by the fountains of the great deep as the global flood began. For over 25 years, I have predicted that scientists would one day discover large volumes of salt water under our largest mountains. The year 2001 saw that discovery, which means we are getting closer to understanding where enough water came from to lift the Ark 14,000 feet up on the side of Mount Ararat.
But when scientists have gone digging for facts about the Great Flood, some surprising facts turn up.
If a gigantic boat is at 14,000 feet on Mount Ararat, then a huge flood must have occurred. But the biblical flood has always been hard to imagine. No one was willing to squarely face two central questions. Where does so much water come from? And where did it go? Modern research can now answer both questions.
The Bible gives us the Ark's dimensions. Modern eyewitnesses tell us what it looks like. And hydrologists tell us it was completely seaworthy, indeed, virtually unsinkable. So assuming for the moment that the Ark is there under the ice, let's turn to the idea of the flood itself. What, if anything, does modern science tell us such a catastrophe might have done or would have done to the planet Earth once the rain stopped falling? Does the flood account for fossils of sea creatures high up on the slopes of great mountain ranges? Was the flood the beginning or the end of continental drift? Does it explain the enormous mountain ranges on the ocean floor or huge gouges in the Earth's surface such as the Grand Canyon? There's more, much more to Noah's flood than just a lot of water. Scientists, theologians, historians, and other investigators have tried for centuries to unravel the mystery of Noah's flood. Their positions range all the way from total acceptance based on faith alone to outright rejection. But Dr. Walter Brown has developed an astonishingly profound theory that touches all points of the argument. Dr. Brown served as director of one of the U.S. Defense Department's major research and development laboratories. His Hydroplate theory has become an important and completely new approach to the geological sciences.
We can see on our planet 25 very strange features that can be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This theory explains how mountains were pushed up in hours. It explains the coal and oil deposits, the rapid continental drift, why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches, hundreds of canyons, and thousands of volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossils, the frozen mammoths, the so-called ice ages, and major canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. It even explains the origin of comets, asteroids, and meteorites. The pre-flood Earth probably had only one very large supercontinent, with lush vegetation, inland seas, and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, but perhaps 9,000 feet high. The Earth also had a lot of salt. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at the rate of 2 miles per second. Following the path of least resistance, it encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure from the weight of the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it, so the water exploded violently out of the rupture.
Representations of the flood have always portrayed rain falling from the sky, and certainly that's what the people would have experienced. But that's only part of what the Bible tells us. It also states specifically that on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Could this be the event Dr. Brown's theory describes?
The Bible describes these events, which occurred about 5,000 years ago. We can now tie them together scientifically. Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice. The high-pressure fountains also eroded rock on both sides of the crack, even launching many into space.
The Apollo 13 astronauts made an important discovery as they were traveling to the moon. They threw waste matter overboard. Surprisingly, it orbited the spacecraft all the way to the moon. Why?
Here on Earth, you would not feel the spacecraft's gravity, because Earth's gravity is so much larger. But when far from Earth, the spacecraft's gravity dominates things near it. Some rocks launched into space were as big as a city block. Their gravity pulled in smaller rocks, water vapor, and muddy water, which in outer space quickly froze. The gas and gravity caused the orbiting swarms to shrink. If those swarms were primarily ice, they became comets. Comets are simply dirty, fluffy snowballs. If the swarms were primarily rocks, they became asteroids. Asteroids are flying rock piles. And meteoroids, meteors, and meteorites are individual rocks. Most eroded rocks were like sand grains and stayed on Earth. They settled through the waters as sediments, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the rupture's width was so great that the compressed rock beneath the hydroplate sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hydroplates, still with lubricating water beneath them, slid downhill away from the chamber floor as it rose about 10 miles to become the mid-Atlantic ridge and the floor of the Atlantic. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of about 45 miles an hour, they ran into resistances, compressed, and buckled. Portions of the hydroplates buckled down, forming ocean trenches. Those that buckled up formed mountains. This is why most mountain ranges are parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the rising oceanic ridges, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated. On the continents, each bowl-shaped depression, or basin, was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes.
This theory of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity supports the biblical story of the deluge in every detail. But is there any scientific evidence to support this amazing theory? On March 22, 1998, a group of boys playing basketball in Monahans, Texas, narrowly missed being struck by a 3-pound meteorite that crashed to the ground only 40 feet away. The police were called, and in less than 48 hours, NASA scientists cracked the meteorite open in a clean room laboratory and discovered inside salt crystals and liquid water.
The NASA scientists who investigated this meteorite believe it came from an asteroid. But that's highly unlikely, because asteroids do not have enough gravity to sustain liquid water, and they can't acquire salt. High-pressure liquid water, suddenly expelled into the vacuum of space, will explode with enough energy to place comets and asteroids into large orbits around the sun. The sun's energy slowly pushed the rocky bodies, asteroids, away from the sun and into the asteroid belt, which lies between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. It worked just like a radiometer. Sunlight heats the black side of each vein more than the white side. Rare gas molecules bounce off the hotter side more forcefully than off the colder side. Likewise, the fountains of the great deep placed oceans of water vapor into orbit around the sun. These gas molecules bounced vigorously off the hot sides of these spinning rocky bodies, the sides facing the sun. Each day-night cycle produced huge temperature changes because asteroids do not have a thick atmosphere. My computer simulations of this event and the radiometer effect showed that the orbits of asteroids slowly spiraled out to the asteroid belt. Even asteroids with highly inclined orbits were gradually herded in to the asteroid belt. This rocky material has been and is still returning to Earth as meteorites. The Italian Space Agency announced in May of 2001 that they had found, using great care to avoid contamination, 78 different types of living bacteria inside meteorites. Those dormant bacteria could not have originated in outer space. What would they eat? They are simply returning home.
Scientists are also scratching their heads over another recent discovery.
Since 1975, I have predicted that large pools of salt water would be found beneath major mountains. That prediction now appears to be coming true. In April 2001, Science magazine announced the discovery of a highly conductive, mile-thick layer about 10 miles beneath the Tibetan Plateau. To everyone's surprise, they struck hot, salty water flowing through crushed granite. Geologists are mystified because surface water can't reach those depths. The hydroplate theory gives a simple answer.
But if all of this can explain where the water came from, how does it answer the second question? Where did it go?
This is the question that stops most scientists dead in their tracks. Yet the hydroplate theory makes the answer quite obvious. As the massive continents, moving at about 45 miles per hour, suddenly slid to a halt, they crushed, thickened, buckled, and rose up out of the water. The floodwaters over the continents receded. Simultaneously, the upward surging subterranean water was choked off. With the water source shut off, the deep, newly formed ocean basins between the continents became reservoirs into which the floodwaters drained. Every basin on the continents was left brimful of water. Some of these post-flood lakes were much larger than the Great Lakes. It now appears that one of these large ancient lakes, which I discovered in 1987 and named Grand Lake, breached its natural barrier 20 miles northeast of the Grand Canyon a few centuries after the flood.
The hydroplate theory solves an astonishing number of the Earth's mysteries. In fact, the question of whether or not there was a flood becomes a question of how the world could be what it is today without a global flood. If Noah's Ark has been discovered at the 14,000-foot level on Mount Ararat, right where the Bible says it should be, and the hydroplate theory can confirm scientifically the biblical description of where all that water came from and where it went, then there is just one final question that should be asked. Is the Bible the only written record that suggests a subterranean source for the flood? And as a matter of fact, the answer is no. Early Jesuit missionaries in China located a 4,320-volume work compiled by imperial edict containing, it claims, all knowledge. In it, we read,
"The earth was shaken to its foundations. The sky sank lower toward the north. The sun, moon, and stars changed their motions. The earth fell to pieces, and the waters in its bosom rushed upward with violence and overflowed the earth."
It's not as poetic as the Noah account, but it does make you stop and think.